What's up, everybody? We are jumping back into one of the two depressing trials that we have been covering and following on this channel. Today is for Letitia Stauch, and a lot has happened since we last met and discussed this case. Those of you that are watching it, there has been a lot of testimony about factually what happened, DNA evidence, fingerprints, factual evidence, and we are going to talk a little bit about that today. And watch a couple short clips from the police interrogation from one of the best kind of attitudes that I can see in a police interrogation here. He's very calm and he gets her, I'll just say. We're going to listen to a little bit of that. Then we are going to listen to a lot of the director at a state hospital who also works in the prison system, who initially met with Letitia Stauch when she was in prison. And we're going to talk about that cross. And we're going to talk about whether or not attorney-client privilege was violated, whether it was waived, whose fault it is, if they are going to call these attorneys as witnesses, how that would work. And of course, I'm going to answer your questions. Yes, they are on lunch break right now for, I believe, another 45 minutes. So we're going to try to keep the video within that time period. There's a lot of clips I want to get to. I am going to listen on 1.5 speed, and Letitia speaks pretty quickly, so that might be difficult at times. But I'm going to listen on 1.5 speed so we can get as many clips in today as possible in this video. So stick around for as long as you want. And I actually have watched this morning's testimony, so we can talk about that mental health expert as well, if you guys want to stick around for it at the end. So please hit the like button if you haven't, and make sure you subscribe because we're working our way to 250K. So let's get to it. Starting with the police interrogation on day 13. Let me see, pull the right clip here. Oh, of course, they're all... There we go. All right. Let's get to it. And you'll get why we're watching these parts as we go.
Versus you taking a chance that you're going to get out. It's
I'm not taking a chance for nothing because I didn't do anything, sir. Okay, sir.
If you say you didn't do anything, do you know what an innocent person would do? I have had plenty of innocent people sitting in your chair. Do you know what an innocent person would do? They would be freaking out.
No.
You are not freaking.
He said, I've had plenty of innocent people sitting in your chair. And do you know what they'd be doing? Freaking out. I'm going to slow this down a little bit just because this one's a little harder to understand. Here we go.
Yeah, right. You think I haven't freaked out?
I heard you
like
freak out on the
days?
phone one time.
Think I haven't freaked out for days? You can't judge the way I freak
No.
something out one way and another way.
I've had the wrong person in a room like this before.
Okay.
And trust me, if they had any idea who did it, they would tell me.
Okay, well,
That makes
If they had any idea who did it, they would tell me. We know she knows who did it, right? This is not guilty by reason of insanity. And she's not telling him. So he's basically saying you're not acting as an innocent person would, which not really fair when it's a cop saying that.
no sense.
I
And
guess
no
that's
jury
what
will
you
buy.
were-
No jury's going to buy
okay.
that you sit here with an answer that somebody else took canon, that all this head wound and all this
Sir.
stuff happened in there. Do you think I don't know what I'm talking about?
Sir, I never question anything.
Do you think a jury is going to buy? So interesting. I would have objected to that as relevance, and I would have objected to it as the ultimate question and invoking what a jury should or shouldn't do from a law enforcement officer, but they didn't, and it came in. And again, we're talking about factual scenarios that they kind of have agreed to, but I never like for someone else to tell us what a jury is going to do.
Well, you must, because you're taking a huge chance, Letitia.
Sir, I'm not taking any chance
How are you not taking
because
a chance?
I know the man upstairs knows I did not do anything.
And he's making a lot of good points. He's like, you're taking a chance by not telling us what's going on. We could find him. We could help you. She's like, I'm not taking a chance because the man upstairs.
Well, he's not going to be on the jury.
Okay. All right, we're not going to go there with that. We're not going to go
We're
there.
going to sensible people who we're going to present evidence in front of.
Let me tell you what. There's a higher power.
There
That
is.
higher power will make sure.
I believe in the higher power as well.
I'm glad you did. That really makes me feel good. It really does. I'm serious. You know,
But Letitia, this comes down to common sense.
I do have
And these prosecutors, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about who you're going to be sitting in front of.
Okay.
And if you're going to take a chance that they're not going to listen to all this evidence, all this blood, all these stories that you've told about Gannon, and that you have the key to finding him and you don't do it, there's nobody else to prosecute.
He makes some really great points. Now, again, I don't like how he invokes the jury and the prosecutor and what's going to happen in the court system. I think that's inappropriate. But he makes some really, really great points.
Why won't you go there?
Why am I? What else am I going to say?
The easiest thing to tell me is the last time you saw Gannon.
I've already told you I'm not forgiving.
But then what do I need to go through again the other things that might have happened again? Where did you gently place Gannon?
What?
I don't know how to phrase it.
What are you talking about?
I don't know, because I don't know where he is.
So he just keeps pushing and keeps pushing. And again, none of it looks good for Letitia. We're going to jump ahead a couple minutes.
What about you? You're the one caught up in it, though. You're the one with all the evidence stacked against you.
Well,
You're the one with all the evidence stacked against you, he says. And again, we're watching this with the prism of she did it. We know she did it. They're not even arguing anymore that she didn't do it. So to say that she lies and manipulates is an understatement. And the mental health experts say, basically coming into this case, we knew that she was someone who lies about stuff and who manipulates.
Help yourself right now.
I don't.
Why would you not?
How am I going to
Tell me what happened.
So what happened? Well, I don't know.
The way you
So I
described
have to stand up for a moment.
absolutely. The wounds that you described to him don't even come close to the blood in the.
That's what you think.
No, it's not.
Okay.
No, this is what people that do this for a living tell me.
Okay.
Again, I wasn't there, but a little gash on his head
Okay.
doesn't explain at all that stuff that's in there.
Okay.
But do you want to go with that? Because when you walk out of here, the last thing on record you're going to have is what you told me, and I would love to be your storyteller.
Okay.
I would love to tell the true story. It will help you. You believe in that higher power? You
I do. That's why. You
what
want to know
about the
why?
truth? Do you study the truth?
And you can see Letitia in trial at the bottom clip, laying her head on the table, not watching, not listening, plugging her ears.
So why I'm not sitting here like going crazy, freaking out, putting on an emotional show like I've seen people involved in this situation put on fake cries and all that. Because I know God knows.
Okay.
I mean,
but what about the truth? You study the same Bible, the same God. It tells a lot about truth in there, and you have not told many truths in this whole thing.
Always a good move when a defendant or somebody uses religion in this situation to turn it back around on them when they're lying and manipulating and hurting people, because there's just no way to get around it. And they end up sounding like a liar, which is exactly what happens here.
well, I don't know that. Guess what? Let me tell you what happened this morning when I woke up. When I woke up this morning, I watched a story about Ron Miller. So he started this show. He ended up like getting talked down to, bullied online, treated like crap, accused of things he didn't do. And that's where he went to the accusation part. And so he went down this whole trail talking about how accusation, and how this did to him, what he had to go through, and all that. But in the end, he kept his faith in Jesus Christ. About the story of Paul, about Saul in the Bible. Okay, I can walk you through a lot in the Bible. If you know what I'm talking about. So he turned those accusations into just keeping steadfast and staying strong, and to believing God's going to do this and keeping whatever. Because in the Bible they persecuted a lot of Christians, right? A lot of them for things they didn't do right. But there's a lot of stories where God made sure they were okay. So when I woke up this morning, I literally decided, God, you can take this, and you can either bring him home, bring him to the front step, drop him off, so that I can please never.
Knowing what we know now, this is pure manipulation, pure twisting. And I think it's interesting to see these clips and look at her in this moment, especially with the context we're getting from some of the mental health experts of what somebody with DID would do, what somebody with severe mental illness would do that is severe enough to affect their ability to know right from wrong and what happened.
Have to worry about this again.
Right.
Or you can let me stay focused on believing in you, not in him. Just the truth will come out. And it's okay, because I don't want to sit here and accuse all these people of whatever. I'm not going to turn the same accusations against them for saying this and saying that, not believing this, not believing that. I'm just going to just sit there and say, I know I did not hurt Keith.
But that, I get
So I've got it paused at 4 hours, 14 minutes. And
So then we jump up a little bit to a really interesting part in this, which, if you remember, at the time, she is not claiming insanity. She is claiming she didn't do it. But then they start having a conversation about what he's thinking and what's in his brain. And he's like, what's important is what's in your brain.
What is wrong with that question?
There's nothing wrong with the question. I've already made it clear that I wasn't going to answer more questions.
You've never answered this one.
Because you have already predetermined what you want in your brain along with everyone else.
Why do you care about what's in my brain?
So you just asked me about mine.
Yeah, because your brain's the only one that counts here. It doesn't matter.
Your brain is the only one that counts here. I think that is a really, really interesting comment that he makes before we even know that she's pleading not guilty by reason of insanity.
What's in my brain. The very last time you saw Gannon, where was he? What was he doing?
Did y'all put a report out?
There's no need to put it out. He can answer.
He won't she won't answer. She won't answer where he is, she knows about it.
So you automatically have a predetermined thing in your brain.
If you give me something else, I'll go.
Yeah, no, wow.
Why do you care about my brain, Letitia? Yours is the one that matters.
Why do you care about my
That's the
brain?
last thing you
Let me
saw.
tell you one more time.
Yours is the one that matters. It's prophetic.
I did not hurt.
I didn't ask
Or
that. I did not ask that. I
do
don't care. What is the last image you have?
All these places I've been.
Why don't you answer that question?
Why don't you
I'm just
answer me?
curious.
Have you checked all these places I've been and where was Gannon? Was he there? Doesn't that have like digging in the brain for a little bit to say?
You're going to live with it for the rest of your life, Letitia.
You're going to live with it for the rest of your life. He later says that if she is innocent, these questions would be so easy to answer. And he's right. So I'm going to answer a few questions before we get to the next day's clips. Kim Ripley, I wore the shirt you gave me the other day. Thank you for that. 220K. That's fun. Carlos, welcome to the crew. Debbie Blair, Peter, does the state have to prove she was not insane at the time of the crime and that she's guilty? So yes, they have to prove that she's guilty. And this question kind of goes with Pat Voorhees. Can't the jury find her guilty but mentally ill? And the answer to that is yes. And today's mental health expert even said that. Just because I think it was a redirect question by the state. They said, people that have DID don't all commit murders, right? People have PTSD, people with anxiety, people that were abused as children. They don't go out and commit murders. Just because they have a mental illness does not make them a murderer, right? Right. And the point is, you can be mentally ill and still not, I hate using double negatives, but still not be not guilty by reason of insanity. Nicole, pertaining to the Vallow trial, voir dire has been used several times outside of jury selection. Could you please explain the context and why and what voir dire can be used in and why? Thanks. So yes, it's even been used in this case, and I think I haven't caught up with the Vallow case over the last couple of days. But when you voir dire a witness, that means you want to ask them for foundational questions. Can they be an expert? Do they have proper expertise? Do they have foundation to answer these questions? And that is a total different voir dire than what you do to the jury. So it happened in this case, I think, in one of these mental health experts to see, do they even know about what goes on at the jail? Do they know these things? Is it even relevant? Do they read these articles? Do they read these books? If the answer is no, the judge can say they don't have any foundation. They can't testify to that. It's not coming in. And you do that. Sometimes you can do it in the presence of the jury. Sometimes you can do it outside the presence of the jury if you don't think a witness has the expertise that they are purporting to have. Christina Maria, welcome. And Pat, thank you. All right, let's get back to the next day here with Dr. Moore. I think this is it. Nope. Let's try again. Why do I keep hitting the wrong one? All right. Dr. Moore. All right. So what's interesting about Dr. Moore is she will do the initial evaluation when Letitia comes to the jail. She also has a bunch of conversations and meetings with Letitia before she's pleading insanity. And those are very, very important factors when she says, because throughout, both of these mental health experts say she's faking, she's putting on, she's trying to help her case. And they can say that because they can compare before and after. And there's even been questions, well, this was before she pled insanity, right? This is before she had any competency issues. This is before she made those arguments. And that's important, I think, to a jury to see. And again, somebody who's dealt with not guilty by reason of insanity pleas, and our office has dealt with them plenty. The ones that work and are successful or even have a good chance at being successful are the ones of people that have either like blacked out. They do not remember what happened. They're not making up a bunch of stories of what happened to try to make themselves not guilty. They're not pointing the finger at anybody else. They're not trying to get immunity. They're like, I have no clue what happened. I don't know. I was not there. I don't remember any of it. Or they're telling like fantasy stories. Like I was flying in the sky and hugging them the whole time. And then they didn't want me to hug them anymore. So I let them go. And it's like somebody got thrown over a bridge or something, you know, like it's things like that where they don't know what they're doing. It's a story that doesn't make sense, but does make sense, if you know what I mean. So I think it's important when you have somebody acting one way over and over again and then completely different after they plead insanity, which is what we're seeing in this case. And soon we're going to get to the end of the day with some fireworks that go off.
And what was her demeanor like when you first met her?
And this is when she first met Letitia Stauch in the prison.
She was, from my recollection, generally very calm, polite. She reported kind of some general symptoms, but we had a very lucid, fluid conversation where there weren't any significant concerns raised. I do recall she was not really in agreement with being on suicide watch, but again, just due to the nature of her alleged crime, as well as being somebody in jail for the first time, I had placed her on suicide watch just as a safety precaution.
And have you done that with many time?
Not anything overt. Again, just being in jail, I think everyone can be a little bit anxious or nervous. I do recall her reporting a history of a generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis.
And that's about it. Generalized anxiety, and she had been abused in the past. That's basically what she reported prior to her insanity defense.
So that seemed fairly consistent. Her self-reported, that seemed consistent with how she was presenting.
And as part of your role at the jail there is to prescribe medication that the inmate might need if they do have a mental illness?
My role is not to prescribe. I'm not licensed to prescribe medication, but what I do is put a referral in for...
Joe, yes, this is the prosecutor.
...somebody to see the psychiatrist. If somebody comes in with prescribed medications that we can verify, then the nursing staff can call the doctor and get those medications started, or the doctor can meet with them and start the medication themselves.
And do you know whether or not that was done with regards to Ms. Stauch?
Yes, our psychiatrist, Dr. Hargraves, had also met with her, I believe on March 5th as well, and prescribed her, I believe it was hydroxyzine, which is an anti-anxiety medication. It's a very kind of generic low medication. It's not something like an antipsychotic, which has helped to kind of prevent some symptoms. It just kind of helps calm down your anxiety a little bit.
And I'm still want to stay on the March 5th, 2020, your first meeting with Ms. Stauch. Are you also, is this a kind of a clinical evaluation at this point? Are you also evaluating if there's anything or some mental illness that she might need that you can either refer out or facilitate at that moment?
Yes.
And as part of that evaluation, do you ask her if she has any mental illnesses?
Yes.
And how did she respond to that?
So the first time she's asked, do you have any mental illnesses? Because now or later, she gives all of these diagnoses and mental illnesses that she has. But what did she say at first? And again, if I'm a prosecutor, I'm hammering this in closing.
She had reported having the prior diagnosis of generalized anxiety disorder.
As you already alluded to. Did she mention any other potential disorders that she might have?
Not that I recall.
Did you see any signs of any mental illness other than what she was telling you about the generalized anxiety?
No.
And when I talk about signs, what does that mean to you?
Signs or symptoms, typically when people have a mental illness, they will have, you can kind of see it. So let's say, for example, somebody could be responding to internal stimuli, and that might be consistent with more of a psychotic disorder. None of that was observed. So sometimes they might be looking around at the room or talking to themselves under their breath. They might seem very sullen. Or
some of this she does later, but right now she's not.
Depressed, manic sort of mood episode. So they might be talking very rapidly. So just a lot of behavioral observations. So speech, affect, body presentation, things like that. We just look at all of that in order to determine a sign or symptom.
And why, Is the term psychosis kind of what you're describing, where they're looking around and acting like someone's there who's not there, or hearing voices that you can't hear, that only they can hear, that kind of thing?
Yes.
Why are you looking for that, or why is that relevant in your evaluation, particularly with Ms. Stauch when you first met her on March 5th?
That's going to play in how we're going to treat her. So somebody who might be psychotic, so to speak, we might need to, again, just.
So somebody posted, Shawnee said, I like the doctor on the stand today much better. I will say the doctor on the stand today was a much more professional witness. You can tell, and we're going to talk a little bit later about this witness, how she is not actually normally called as an expert witness because her work is not usually done in the forensic capacity. She's just there at the jail to make sure everybody's okay. They're make sure everybody's okay. As other people have said, when you go to prison, it's not great. And usually if you've never been in prison before and you're a mother of multiple kids and a normal person with no criminal history, as Letitia Stauch seemed to be, you're going to be pretty depressed in prison. And so they do have mental health counselors and people there to help you, like this doctor.
To put them in a potentially restrictive housing. If their behavior is very erratic, we might need to bump up a psychiatric referral, monitor medication compliance if they're prescribed medication, just to ensure that stability. So looking for that, it's just important to see how we will manage them in a jail setting, what sort of unit or housing to follow up with them.
Okay. Is psychosis, where you're hearing things or seeing things that aren't there, is that tied to a severe mental illness that you see that in someone?
Yes.
And is that one of the things you might be looking for when you meet anybody in your initial diagnosis, or someone who's entered at the jail for first-degree murder? See that, you may have to go to a plan B, C, or D.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you didn't see any of that with Ms. Stauch when you first met her?
I did not.
Did you ask Ms. Stauch about whether or not she had any outpatient treatment for any mental illnesses?
I did ask her that.
And how did she respond to that?
She denied any prior hospitalizations or treatment.
So does that include any inpatient or outpatient treatment?
Yes.
I know it's pretty obvious, but what's the difference between the two?
So outpatient treatment, you might go to therapy. You might drive yourself to therapy once a week. And inpatient is where you're living there. It could be something as short as 72 hours to years. Again, higher level intensive treatment is inpatient treatment with 24.
So she had never had any inpatient or outpatient treatment. She did self-report some abuse. We talked about that. And then let's see if we want to, I guess we'll listen to a little bit of this to give some context to stuff that comes later.
Adequate follow-up. I did that just due to the high profile nature. I wanted to make sure that we were providing her adequate follow-up on a relatively frequent basis.
And do you know whether or not the jail would monitor her, especially in the beginning, March 5th, 2020, every few minutes to make sure she's doing okay?
They do. When people are in restrictive housing or in the medical ward, and initially she was placed in the medical ward due to the high profile status, some concerns for her safety. So anybody in restrictive housing is assessed by the deputies on the ward every 15 minutes.
Every 15 minutes, they're supposed to be checked on, right? Now later, this is debunked as he tells a grueling story of someone who took their own life and wasn't found until much later, as they could tell pathologically, that this must have happened earlier in the day. So they try to make it seem like, oh, we were watching her every 15 minutes. If she would have been doing something, we would have seen it. And I think the defense actually makes a good point proving that that is not true. But it's a very, very small good point, but still a good point.
So if something unusual happened during this 15-minute watch period, would you learn about it and do some follow-up with it?
Yes.
Did anything unusual happen in the beginning of Ms. Stauch's incarceration at jail?
Not specifically.
The question, like if anything would have happened, you'd know about it, is a bad question, because you can usually debunk that at some point, because it's hard to know if you don't know if something happened
that day. But there was within the month of March, there was a couple times that I had been asked to do some follow-up meetings with her.
And we'll get to those once we get to your notes. I do kind of want to jump ahead a little bit. At some point, did you learn that Ms. Stauch was raising competency issues in court?
Yes, I believe that was around the beginning of June.
June 5th, 2020? Sometime after that period, did Ms. Stauch raise a concern that she might have multiple personalities?
Yes.
I know that's not the term that we use in the DSM-5, but on your March 5th, 2020 evaluation, did you see any signs of dissociative identity disorder with Ms. Stauch?
No.
And what might you expect to see if she did have that disorder on March 5th, 2020?
And again, he's saying the dates very intentionally. This is in March. I think it's May or June that she pleads insanity. But in March, did she have anything that indicated she had DID or any of these disorders that we're talking about here at trial today? No.
I would expect to see somebody that was losing gaps of time. Somebody who would be reporting some concerns like, you know, I don't remember certain historical information, so significant life events like a marriage or a death. Somebody would also be losing gaps of everyday events. So somebody with that disorder might go, let's say, shopping, and they would come back, and if they came back to their main personality at that time or personality state, they would have no idea why they bought things. They typically forget things like how to do their job, use a computer, how to drive.
And again, she was exhibiting none of that.
What did she tell you about whether or not she had control of her brain? Do you see that in your notes anywhere?
Yes, she said, I have control of my brain, and she wanted to be an advocate for herself.
Now, again, does that mean that she was not insane at the time of the crime? No, but it's also indicative of how she was acting before she pled not guilty by reason of insanity. She has control of her brain. She never voiced any issues or that she had DID, which now she just says she knows she talks to people that aren't there and vampires and all these names and all this stuff. But she was mentioning none of that in March, which I do think indicates how she manipulates and what she's doing.
And where did that come from? Did you ask that question, or is she just volunteering that to you?
Just volunteered it.
Okay. And you see in your notes a little lower there where it says, she said, mentally, I'm fine.
Yes, she said, mentally, I'm fine. I'm not guilty. The truth will come out.
And so where did
Mentally, I'm fine. I'm not guilty. The truth will come out. Then the truth did come out. And now mentally, she's not fine. That's basically how this timeline went. At least that's how I'm explaining it if I'm the prosecutor.
that come from? Were you asking about the case, or is she just volunteering information?
Just volunteering information.
Did you actually tell her about her charges and whether or not she should talk about them?
I did encourage her.
2 a.m.
She
Sure.
tells her, don't talk about your charges with me, but I'm going to skip ahead a little bit.
She said, regarding a chronic mental health problem, patient has a history of mental health concerns. However, when asking patient today, she denies any mental health issues or concerns at this time.
She denies any mental health issues or concerns at this time. Coming straight from Letitia Stauch before she pled not guilty by reason of insanity.
And is that consistent with what you have seen up until this point?
Yes.
Now I want to jump to March 16th, where you actually meet with Ms. Stauch again. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Tell us about what you found with regards to what her mental condition was on that day.
I noted that everything was appropriate. So her mood was appropriate. Her thought was coherent. She had no suicidal, homicidal ideations, no auditory or visual hallucinations. She was oriented to person, place, time, and situation, had an intact memory, fair judgment, good insight.
Any evidence of mental illness up until this point?
No.
Let's jump to March 20th of 2020. Do you recall seeing her on that day? It says reason for referral, subject findings. Do you see that?
So again, they go through a couple days where she goes and there's no mental health issues, but we are going to get to where she tells her that Gannon's body was found and how Letitia responds.
We were informed that Gannon's body was found in Florida. And so they wanted me to check in with her because that is a significant event in anybody's life. And so they wanted me to check in and follow up with her.
Were you, as far as you know, the first person to tell her that Gannon's body was discovered?
I believe so.
And how did she respond?
Okay, let's just stop right there because this is going to be the beginning of a factual scenario that brings in other lawyers as potentially witnesses. Did they show up? What does the log show? COVID, all sorts of stuff are about to come because of that question. Were you the first one to tell her? She basically says, I believe so. So she doesn't really know. I found when I watched this back after hearing some of the hot takes and getting questions from you guys, I thought it was going to be much different. I do not feel like she was very definitive that she was the one to break the news as the first person to tell her. And I think that was a little bit clunky. Now they're going to talk about how she responded and how she reacted, but I thought this was going to go a little differently. I pictured it in my head differently before I watched it because she said, I don't believe anyone had told her before me, but she wasn't positive.
When you told her?
She was a bit tearful, a little bit overwhelmed at that time.
What did she say?
She kind of, to me, underplayed.
She had
overwhelmed. She was a bit tearful and a little overwhelmed. It's like, I mean, overwhelmed and tearful is kind of what I'd expect, right? But the way that she says it.
Noted that she did not have anyone to talk to in the jail. She had wanted to call her mother. And
all of that to me makes sense as a reaction, right? I mean, if we're gonna point out the negatives about Letitia Stauch, let's point out the stuff that makes sense. overwhelmed, tearful, wants to call her mom when she hears this news.
She was talking also about losing some time out of her cell previously that week. So she essentially was asking to call her mom.
Did you tell her that you were there for her if she wanted to talk and provide mental health counseling?
Yes. So
Go ahead.
again, in this situation, given the charges, but her being a stepmother and losing a child, I wanted to assess her for grief and see if she was okay. And
Again, this lady is provided by the jail to be a mental health counselor to people that are in the jail. So that's what she was doing in this situation as well. She is there to help Letitia Stauch if she needs to talk about something. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because a lot of people, okay, we are talking about whether or not, and a lot of the questions are, did Letitia Stauch, through her attorneys, waive her attorney-client privilege? And there's more on that later in the day. And a lot of people are saying, opening the door, open the door, open the door, open the door to this, open the door to that. We've heard it in other trials. Our podcast is named Opening the Door. And they're saying, oh, the defense opened the door by talking about her lawyers. However, let's listen here during direct, before the defense ever comes up. Do they start to talk about lawyers a little bit?
And this is a note that you have with regards to May 12th at 5:46 p.m. It's just below the one that says report evidence of suicidal thoughts where you say no.
yes,
Was there a point in time where she said, I can't talk to you anymore?
yes.
What was that about?
I believe that her attorneys had recommended that she not speak to the mental health staff in the jail. She specifically said to me, I still can't talk to you because you can be subpoenaed.
That's the first time I remember her lawyers and what they said to her being invoked. On direct, asking about the lawyers saying that she can't talk to her anymore.
And what happened to your treatment of the defendant after she said she didn't want to talk to you?
Typically, we're going to respect their wishes. We're going to always offer. So anytime we have a scheduled contact, we will still offer to talk to her. And if she wants to decline, or any patient or inmate in the jail wants to decline, they absolutely have that right, and we'll respect that.
And did she tell you who was telling her not to talk to you?
I don't know that she said it specifically, but it was my understanding that it was due to her contacts with her attorney.
And so what's interesting about that is, what is that, right? Is that a privileged communication? And the answer is no. Whether or not it was voluntary or involuntary, Letitia Stauch, by telling a third party, this doctor, she's waiving her attorney-client privilege to that conversation. Now, that is not a waiver that waives it to everything she's ever spoken about with those lawyers, but because she decided to tell this doctor that, it is no longer privileged. But conversations with Letitia Stauch and her lawyers around this doctor came out during direct. And I just think that's interesting to the discussion. So then I have a note that June, I think, is when they raised mental illness as an issue in the case. And then a bunch of reports of mental illness start. And we're going to hear a little bit of those now.
Talk to someone more than a social worker. She said, I was creating stories that aren't true and don't remember conversations. She then said, I need more help. She also
So she admits to creating stories that are not true. And she needs extra help.
said, I can't leave January. And then she brought up Andrew Womack and his son dying in Colorado and coming back to life 8 hours later. She said, regarding Gannon, I know that's not physically possible, but I want to fix things. I pray his same prayers, and wrote him a letter. Then she said she regretted taking the back road off 25. That's Highway 25. She then said, I can't relive every situation, every day, and every hour.
Okay. Now, how did this come about? I mean, what did you say to spark her to talk about Gannon's death?
We probably were talking just about the stress because, again, when I talk to somebody and ask them how they're doing, they just kind of report this. And
well, yeah, when they're in prison for stuff like this and you ask them how they're doing, they're not going to be great. And why aren't they great? Well, they're probably going to talk about the case, even though you tell them not to talk about the case, right?
to my knowledge, yes.
I'm jumping.
Did that
ahead.
trigger anything on your behalf to evaluate her for dissociative identity disorder?
No, that to me made me concerned, but it made me concerned because up until that time, for the majority of her contacts, except if it was a weekend and I might have not been at the jail, I was pretty much the only one seeing her. And so my concern at that time was if this information does go to court and I'm the only person assessing her, that would be a kind of a one person's word against another. So at that.
So she knows that now this could potentially go to court. We need to get somebody else involved. So I'm not the only, forensic person that's going to come and testify about what's going on with her.
Time I started trying to have some other mental health clinicians also have contact with her. So it was not just my subjective, but other people's subjective.
Correct. The lawyers at this time, the lawyers that might be called as witnesses, the lawyers that we're talking about are a different set of lawyers, not this set of lawyers that are here trying the case. They're a prior set of lawyers for Letitia Stauch.
Observations of her behavior at that time. And again, as I had talked about in clinical and forensic settings, somebody reporting having, or someone saying, okay, I'm going to start acting out, I'm going to be impulsive and have other personalities, then my worry becomes more about, are they going to start faking mental health symptoms? Essentially if they're just going to start faking things. So at that time, my thought would have been, okay, well, now we might see an increase in behaviors that are going to be attempts to act out that aren't consistent with her prior presentations.
And that's exactly what she then reports happens, that there are multiple times she basically says Letitia's faking stuff. She starts self-diagnosing. Letitia also says that she is brilliant, meaning Letitia is brilliant. And all of that stuff starts happening exactly after she expected it and wanted to get other people involved. So a lot of that to me made sense. I thought the state did a great job of asking, do you expect this? Does this happen a lot of times in these cases where people start making up stuff to fit in with their diagnosis, even though, it wasn't there before, it's not necessarily true? She said yes to that. Then on cross, the defense makes a good point at the start that it's not exactly a comfortable environment because Letitia Stauch. So we have like red dot criminal defendants here that need extra guards. You can't go alone with them certain places. So she's like a high risk person, probably because she tried to do what she did in the cop car and other issues that they had with her. So she couldn't just go and have a one-on-one eval, this doctor with Letitia Stauch. There had to be 2 other guards there. Then because of COVID, there was masks, doors closed, whatever it may have been. So it wasn't exactly a comfortable environment for Letitia Stauch to open up for somebody for mental health help. And while I think that's actually a really good point as to why maybe she didn't talk about some of this personal stuff and some of this mental health issues or abuse, that's a good point. Except for the fact that once her mental health diagnosis became part of the case, now she is able to talk about it. Now she's able to talk about abuse more openly. Now she's able to talk about her mental health issues more openly. So did that really make a difference or no? Then he was asking her a bunch of stuff about, well, the jail got sued because they mishandled COVID. Isn't that why you got your job? Because the jail had so many lawsuits. I don't think that's relevant at all. And then we get to the body found in Florida discussion and whether or not this doctor, was actually the person to break that news to Letitia Stauch. So this is where a lot of the fireworks went off that you all wanted to talk about. So here we go.
You and Mr. Young about the day, I think it was March 20th of 2020. That was when you discussed the issue of Gannon's body being found. Is that correct? Do you remember that discussion?
Yes.
And Mr. Young asked you, do you remember what she said? And you said, yeah, Gannon's body was found in Florida. And she said she'd never been to Florida and all this other thing. And he asked you, why was that significant?
Mm-hmm.
Why was it significant in your conversation with Letitia? Why was it significant that she said she'd never been to Florida?
Because that's where his body was found.
Why is that significant?
Well, I'm not sure what you're asking in that sense, but typically somebody with dissociative identity disorder would not be able to, they would have kind of amnesia of certain events.
If her DID was in effect and she blacked out or is missing parts of events at the time when the crime was committed, which is the big question in the case, not does she have DID, not does she have mental health issues, not does has she been diagnosed with something. That is not the question. The question is, was it in effect at the time that the crime was committed? And she would have expected that she wouldn't know where Gannon's body was or where she even put Gannon's body because she would have had, that missing in her memory.
And so it was odd to me that if she was not there, why she would spontaneously say she wasn't there.
Okay. And if she didn't have anything to do with Gannon's disappearance, how would she know he was found in Florida?
Correct.
That's the significance?
Yes.
Okay. Did you know that her attorneys earlier that day had been to visit her
I don't know that
So that's a perfectly fine question. That doesn't violate privilege. And we're going to kind of go through this piece by piece.
off the top of my head, but if that
And
was
they had actually
then-
told her that Gannon's body had been found.
Now that's an issue, that they had told her that Gannon's body had been found. He could have, and again, how I was going to explain this was just funny while I'm watching it and pausing it to myself, making notes. I'm not even going to do it right now because the judge does such a good job fixing this question for this defense lawyer. So we're just going to listen to the judge say, here's how you should ask it, where you're not violating privilege, but you still get your point across to the jury that someone else could have told her before this doctor showed up. This doctor doesn't know for a fact that she is the first one that told her about the body being found or the body in Florida or whatever it may have been. The judge does a flawless job of explaining it, so I don't need to. But again, this lawyer, it seemingly was towing the line of privilege when he really didn't have to.
And sustained jury will disregard.
So if you were to be told that her attorneys that came and talked to her that day,
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this. May we approach?
No, because I see where this one is going, and I think that you
He
can
says no, because I see where this is going, and now listen to the judge explain how he should ask this question.
ask it in a hypothetical, because what this witness is talking about is she's testifying about dissociative identity disorder and whether somebody would or wouldn't have recollection of an event based on whether or not they had a particular personality that was manifesting at the time that the person was in a geographical location. So if somebody had some information from some other source, you can ask the witness whether or not this would or would not be consistent with a dissociative identity disorder. So I will allow that.
So basically, if she was able to tell you where the body was, she still could have blacked out then and had DID and been having an episode at the time of the crime, but somebody else filled that gap for her. It's possible somebody filled that gap before you told her about the body being found. Isn't that correct? And it's true that somebody could have filled that gap and told her that it was found in Florida, right? And she was just regurgitating information to you that she had heard from somebody else. That's how you ask that question. You don't state as a fact something that's privileged.
That.
well, I just say answer what you just said.
Can I just say answer the judge's question? It's like, no, dude, you can't do that.
But I'll try to put it to you as artfully as the judge did. If, with respect to dissociative identity disorder, if hypothetically Ms. Stauch had heard from her attorneys a couple hours before, said, hey, they found Gannon's body in Florida,
Or someone.
would that change how you feel?
Because he's about to get impeached later with the visitation log. But if he would have just said someone could have told her before.
With DID in this portion of what was going on March the 20th of 2020?
No.
No? Why not?
Because with dissociative identity disorder, there's in the DSM, it talks about kind of a possession form or non-possession form, and possession form being, again, that amnesia, inability to recall those.
And then she kind of just repeats her answer before. But really interesting back and forth. And then there's more discussion on this topic a little bit later. I think this is it.
With respect to dissociative identity disorder, you were able to tell me that just within pretty much on March 5th, 2020, the first day in 30 or 40-minute meeting with her, rule out dissociative identity disorder, correct?
Mhm.
Okay. So I have
And actually, she said earlier that, and one of the questions of the prosecutor is, when you see this, right? You can tell when people have severe mental health disorders very quickly because of your training, right? And did she? No. Based on multiple conversations, correct. Based on multiple self-reports, right? And how she acted and how she talked. And you can tell because of how they talk, how they act, where they look. And that was confirmed with the mental health expert today.
a copy of the DSM-5,
Sure.
and that's more or less the Bible of psychology and psychiatry, correct?
Sure.
Okay. And we were talking earlier about possession forms of dissociative identity disorder and non-possession forms. And it says most individuals with non-possession form dissociative identity disorder do not overtly display their discontinuity of identity for long periods of time.
Yes.
What does that mean?
So they don't display their discontinuity where they are distant from it or blackout or whatever you want to call it for long periods of time.
So
Different
those
personalities.
are kind of shorter periods of time where people could dissociate and it's kind of just how it's written. I think what you're getting to is, could there be times that it happened allegedly and it not be seen? Sure. However, in my initial evaluation with her, typically somebody who was having these amnesias or losses of time would report that. They would report something that they were worried about missing gaps of time as well as forgetting things. And so there would be a general concern that I would expect somebody to report, not somebody to have an adequate orientation and deny any of that. There's also comorbid symptoms that go along with that. So People with dissociative identity disorder tend to be, have a high rate, about 70% have attempted suicide or engage in frequent self-harming behavior. So those things were not met. I also would have expected somebody to report clinically significant impairment in social and occupational functioning as a result of that. So when somebody denies those things, then I can absolutely rule it out because it's not a concern to them. So it's not impairing their functioning.
So you can rule out a disease that symptoms may not manifest themselves for long periods of time. You can rule it out in just 20, 30, 40 minutes. Is that what you're saying?
Generally, and then if there's
Okay.
more information, I can
Now,
always
in
go back.
dissociative identity disorder,
I'm going to ask that she be allowed to finish her answer before the next question.
I was just trying to say that if symptoms come up, absolutely.
and sometimes it can take years to diagnose somebody with dissociative identity disorder, correct?
In terms,
Yeah, I mean, anytime you say you can figure it out quickly, people are going to be on both sides of that. I think what they're trying to say is it's obvious if somebody has it and she didn't have it, and it's going to be up to a jury to think, did she jump to a conclusion or did she do all of the evaluation necessary to determine whether or not she had it? Okay. Now we are back on redirect and we're going to be talking about the prison logs and did the lawyers actually come and visit Letitia Stauch before this doctor did to even be able to tell her about the body being found?
Nonstop talking kind of thing.
yes,
Did you have to ask a lot of questions or did you just sit and listen?
a lot of it was listening.
The conversation you had with her on March 20th of 2020 about Gannon's body being found. Do you remember counsel asking you questions about that?
Yes,
He asked you a hypothetical about if the attorneys came in and told her about it, then she would have known about it before you talked to her. Do you remember that line of questioning?
yes,
Does the jail keep track when attorneys visit the jail?
yes.
And do you have a log of every time the attorneys make a professional visit?
The jail would, I do not.
Have you seen those logs before?
He's laying a
Don't
foundation.
think so.
May I approach her?
You're the witness.
The witness.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to see what he's.
Oh, yep, that's true.
Approach witness.
You may go ahead.
Recognize that document.
Yes, it's the visitation log report.
And is it the visitation log reports from Ms. Stauch
Yes,
at the El Paso County Jail?
Is hearsay. Can't testify to what that is. If they want to get somebody that can lay a proper foundation for this document, that's fine. This is not the person to do that.
But she may
Hearsay. This is not the person that knows what this document is. Judge is like, how do we know that?
be, she may not be. I don't know that. You need to ask her whether or not it's a business record and whether she can lay the foundation for a business record.
You recognize this document as a business record?
Yes.
Surprise question, right? Is this something that's routinely kept at the jail and is actually an open record for the public?
yes,
And is this a business record with regards to professional visits of Ms. Stauch?
yes,
And would this reflect any professional visits by her attorneys in the time frame we're talking about, March 20th?
Your Honor, I'm objecting
Yes.
under Crawford. This is hearsay. I can't cross-examine this document. Or the person.
Your Honor, he brought this up.
Stop, both of you.
Yeah, and that's the other thing. Hearsay, it's like this is used for impeachment purposes, kind of, but who are you impeaching? You can't impeach the lawyer. So it's just kind of a very weird set of circumstances. If a witness would have testified that the lawyers showed up, but a witness didn't testify. So it's not something in evidence. So you can't technically impeach it. So it's not necessarily going to come in as an exception to hearsay based on the impeachment rule, but it is a business record and business records can come in. I'm not sure that she's the right person to testify to it, but the judge allows her to testify that this is something kept in the ordinary course of business. It is reliable. Anybody can order it with a public records request, and we can see this. This is something that is readily available, and therefore making it reliable. And the judge buys that, and so it ends up coming in.
I have an objection. If I want a response, I'll ask for one. The objection's overruled. Right now, we're working on laying a business record exception to the hearsay rule. So let's deal with that first. It hasn't been asked to be offered to be admitted yet, but I understand what we're dealing with. It's been identified for the record. Go ahead and
And Your Honor, could you advise Mr. Young to not taunt me in open court? It's actually the person who brought this up originally, so yelling across the courtroom. I don't appreciate it, and I don't think it's professional.
So let me just take a second here. Okay. This video is already going longer than I expected. We're going to probably go just a little over an hour today. So if you're here to hang, get comfortable. So when he stands up and he says something like this, can you tell him not to talk to me across the courtroom? And, he's doing this and judge, can you just tell him not to do this? It's like, all right, man, you've showed your cards now. The jury is seeing you upset, making this a bigger deal than it even needs to be, making you look like you told something that was not true, that you're trying to mislead them. And actually on cross, he comes back and makes a very good point that this could have been a Zoom meeting. And we don't know if they were logging the Zoom meetings for lawyers because this is right during COVID. And whether or not she remembers if March of 2020 was COVID time, it was. And most of us in the world remember that. So most of the jury would remember that. And he actually had a pretty good response to it. But instead, he absolutely makes it look like he is losing here and he is frustrated. And I will tell you, not all trial lawyers, but a lot of trial lawyers are high strung, type A, confrontational. And, you have this urge to stand up and fight a lot throughout a trial. And practicing patience and humility and calmness throughout a trial and kindness is really important and can go such a long way, because when you start to do what he's doing, it seems like you've already lost in front of the jury. It almost never works. We've seen some other trials where lawyers have won and have still done that. I'm not saying you can't win a trial acting like that, but it does not look good. If you want to actually, I've had conversations like this where a lawyer's been annoying throughout a trial. And you know what I do? I wait until we take a break. They take a million breaks. And if you notice, the judge is like, anything from the state, anything from the defense before we move on. That's when you stand up and say, Judge, throughout the trial, he starts kind of talking to me or blaming me for stuff or saying, well, he brought it up. Can you just tell him not to do that in front of the jury and not to comment on my lawyering and what I'm doing around the courtroom? Can you ask the prosecution not to do that? That's when you do it. Outside the presence of a jury, you're allowed to do it. It's appropriate. The judge is probably more likely to direct him not to than here, where the judge is very unlikely to reprimand the prosecutor in front of the jury for these kind of shenanigans going back and forth.
Well, let's make sure we're all on the same page. I make the rulings. Everybody directs their comments to me. If there's an objection, I'll ask for grounds. I'll rule on the objection. We'll move on. So everybody, both sides, direct your comments to me. I'll leave it at that. Mr. Young, you were in the midst of making or establishing a foundation for a business record. Go ahead.
So this is what you purported it to be, the jail logs for professional visits at that time frame when Ms. Stauch told you that Gannon was found in Florida. You remember that?
Yes.
And would this indicate to you whether or not her attorneys had access to her prior to Gannon's body being found and prior to you talking to her about Gannon's body being found?
They did not.
Does it tell you when the last professional visit was prior to that contact?
March 13th of 2020,
And when was the next visit after your conversation with her in March 2020?
April 9th, 2020.
In addition to what we just talked about, what was her demeanor like when she was telling you that Gannon's body was found in Florida?
She was a bit tearful, but again, also kind of asking about or focusing on other.
Right. And we've had that answer kind of before. There was some comment about her eating feces. I'm not sure how that's going to come up. We don't need to dig into that right now. On recross, they allowed him, the defense attorney, to ask about those logs. He did. We talked about the COVID, the Zoom stuff. But then at the end of the day, it was very interesting because at the end of the day, the defense, and again, there's a lot of posturing and bluffing that happens in trials. And a lot of times it happens outside the presence of the jury at the end of the day. Like, we may call this person as a witness, judge. And what are you guys going to do about that? Now you got to go home and prep for this. I mean, we've seen this in other trials. Can you tell us the witness lineup in the Gwyneth Paltrow case at the end of every day? Tell us the witness lineup. Who are you going to call? When are you going to call them? Things like that. And I don't know if that's what this was at the end of the day, but the judge was not very happy with them kind of threatening to call prior attorneys as witnesses in this case. And he explains how that's going to go if they decide to do that.
Either Dr. Perez or Dr. Gray tomorrow.
We testify, but
All right. Okay. Then we'll see everybody in the morning. Thank you.
Just one thing while we're all here, Your
Mr. Cook.
Honor. Based on some of the testimony today, we can follow up with a written supplemental endorsement, but it would be for rebuttal. We'd like to introduce or endorse Katie Strobel or Kim Chalmers as possible defense witnesses. Attorneys of Ms. Stauch.
And the purpose?
The purpose is they would have done the visits through WebEx on the day in question.
And so they're going to testify about a conversation they had with Ms. Stauch and what it was that they told her.
Your Honor, I don't know. I'm just putting it's a possibility.
Yeah. See, he's just like, I don't know what they're going to testify to, Judge. I'm going to prove I'm right and not misleading this jury and say, like, I might call them to back up what I'm saying. But the judge is like, let me get this straight.
Well, the reason why I asked that question is because what I'm going to get is whether or not there's a waiver of attorney-client privilege.
We had a
Right.
decision. I just want
So obviously, and you don't get to make that decision, Ms. Stauch does. And that's a conversation that I would have to have with her because it's not, if this
Lawyers don't waive attorney-client privilege. It's not the lawyer's privilege. It is the client's privilege. And he would have to get a long colloquy with her, asking questions, make sure she knows what she is doing when she waives this privilege, because you can inadvertently waive privilege, which we've talked about already, by telling a third member or things like that. But if you're going to waive privilege, it wouldn't mean that she would waive privilege to every conversation she had with all of her lawyers, right? She could have a different privilege with these lawyers, this attorney-client privilege with these attorneys, and one with her old lawyers, which she could waive the old lawyers. They don't let you use attorney-client privilege as a sword and a shield, meaning you can waive it and use it like they're trying to use right now, and then not allow the prosecution to ask any questions that are protected by attorney-client privilege. That would be the shield. And the sword would be obviously when you're using it on offense. So you're not allowed to do that. But there are a lot of things going on and a lot of moving parts about whether or not, I absolutely don't think it's waived at this point. Nothing has come into evidence. A lawyer has asked a question. Nothing has come into evidence. Mr. Stauch hasn't waived attorney-client privilege. And so I don't think it's been waived at this point. But if they call them as witnesses before they testify or take the stand, the judge is going to have to specifically ask Ms. Stauch, do you waive attorney-client privilege?
this were just an issue of Ms. Strobel or Ms. Chalmers were going to testify that they made a phone call, that's one thing. But here the issue
Again,
is
the judge is saying, if you're going to say the lawyers and Ms. Strobel and whatever are her prior lawyers, and if you're going to say like they did something or they tried a Zoom call and it didn't work, those actions are not covered by attorney-client privilege. But what you said on that Zoom call and what you said during that phone call, that is attorney-client privilege.
is what was the information that was relayed in that phone call. And that clearly implicates the attorney-client privilege and can only be waived by Ms. Stauch.
Understood, Your Honor.
So, and right now, as I see it, there is really no evidence of any conversation, which is why the DA is, I don't see this as an attorney-client waiver yet, because there's been no evidence that's been introduced about that. There's been all kinds of innuendo, but as I told the jury, nothing that the attorneys say is evidence. So
perfect explanation by the judge again. He needs to get a YouTube show. Bella, what if the prosecution can prove the defense was never at the jail to tell her about Gannon's body? Well, I think the point is, at this point, it's been made such a big deal that it would just make the defense attorneys, or they probably, and let's be honest, the defense attorneys probably aren't lying. They're probably not trying to mislead. Letitia probably told them that. And so they would either think the lawyers or Letitia Stauch is lying once again about this, which then again elevates it and makes it a bigger deal than it even had to be. Because at this point, we're trying to figure out, well, what would a person do? What would be normal if they found out this information? She was a little teary-eyed. Was she not teary-eyed enough? So you lose all of that kind of argument and gray area and muddy water. And instead it becomes, oh, she was trying to lie because she knew her reaction wasn't correct. She knew her reaction wasn't proper, and they proved it.
I can tell you that before they would testify, I would have to have a long conversation with Ms. Stauch. Okay. All right. Court will be in recess then.
All right. So I kind of wanted to talk about the jury questions before lunch that we got from today's expert. I know the court is back in session, so everybody that was going to leave probably has already left. Let me answer a few questions, and then I want to talk quickly just for a few minutes about the expert that was called today. Nicole, I'm really getting the impression this defense is way more confident than they should be. It's almost disturbing. Either that or they know they're going to lose. Gabriella, off topic. Will you cover the Charlie Adelson trial? Probably. Nicole, everything changes to benefit her, and I'm not buying into her BS of DID. Narcissistic. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I feel pretty confident about, that the state's proven beyond a reasonable doubt, is she is a manipulator. She is willing to do and say whatever to benefit her in one way or the other. Jay Tizzo, ironically, we are going to reach out to you to see if you would join us for a few minutes few-minute video to talk about the intersection of law and mental health. Not sure I'm an expert on that, but I know how we deal with it in our situations and situations like this. There's a lot of crossover between law and mental health. Tom Hubble, thank you. Great work, Peter. Nicole Wheeler is a huge help to getting me signed up. Nicole Wheeler is a huge help in a lot of different ways. She's incredibly generous, incredibly kind. She's loyal. She's always in the chat, always having a good time, always keeping things positive. And I appreciate all of that so much. So much. And thank you, Tom. All right. So let's get to today's expert here just for a few minutes. She's a clinical psychologist. She has to understand the case if she's going to determine whether or not the defendant understands the case. Letitia Stauch, generally, she knew her as a liar or manipulator based on what other people said. She was happier than she would have expected. She would start talking to vampires mid-convo. She definitely thinks Letitia Stauch was faking this and making it up. In fact, the vampires had a lot of the same names from the vampires in the movie Twilight, which is a little weird. She names all sorts of personalities, one of which was Tisha, which we have heard from before, but a lot of them we have never heard from. Nobody in her life has ever heard from them. And you're seeing now when we start, and this is what I was mentioning when we went through some of the lay witnesses and you heard them ask questions. Ever hear Letitia say this name or talk about split personalities or talk about this or that? And when they said no everywhere, this is why, because they knew this evidence and testimony was coming and they set it up and now they're spiking it. DID is very rare. 0 to 1% of people have it. That I think is interesting. It's a destructive disorder. You don't know what's happening to you. You're very poor functioning for the most part. Usually not a genius like Letitia Stauch self-reported. And then on cross, a bunch of what ifs. Is this possible? Is that possible? Could this indicate DID? Could that indicate DID? Isn't it true that you could have DID with this? Now, one thing, my favorite thing the defense attorneys have done this entire case, for anybody that doesn't know, on Thursday, tomorrow, the NFL draft, the first round. And throughout the weekend is the NFL draft. It is literally one of my top 5 favorite sporting events to watch of the year, probably higher than that. If you take FSU out, anything FSU out, it may be my favorite sporting event to watch of the year. And he did use an NFL draft analogy. Like some people are delusional. They played at a D3 school and wasn't even a starter, and they think they're going to be a first overall pick. That would be delusional. Delusions of that type are indicative of DID. Not that great of a point, but an NFL draft analogy, I'm here for it. I do mock drafts every year. I have another buddy that's a lawyer, and starting in law school, we do these mock drafts and put them up against each other. And we have bets as, who's going to get more right, matching player with team and slot and all that stuff. It's really fun. It's like my favorite thing ever. I love the NFL draft. Okay. What else do we have on cross? He wants to impeach her with this article, but she says she doesn't really know a ton about it. We had some voir dire there during that article, whether she uses it, whether it's relevant. More questions on that later. Letitia Stauch would complain because her lawyers weren't coming to visit her in jail, and COVID changed things in the jail, which I thought was a good point, because now you can relate that back to the prior conversation that COVID made things differently. Maybe that's why they're not on the log. On redirect, again, this is where I mentioned he already said people that have DID or other mental disorders doesn't mean they're murderers. It also doesn't mean they're insane at the time of the murders. And then something I thought was really interesting, okay? Because any chance, and I always say this, right? And I told you guys, I like when jurors ask questions. We did a whole video on jury questions. We get to see and hear what the jury is thinking about, what they think is important, what are they trying to determine when they ask questions. Are they totally dismissing this insanity plea? I think we get our answer right here when we listen to the jury questions. And I'm going to slow it down because there's a lot of words in these jury questions, and they're not lawyers, but they do their best to come up with questions. And some of them are really, really interesting questions. So let's just a couple minutes and then we're done.
Evidence, or to be rigorously honest, or to hold one, or inability.
All right, so here we go. They've already discussed it. Now he's going to read the first jury question.
Dr. Grimmett, can a difficulty or inability to face evidence, or to be rigorously honest, or to hold oneself accountable for
the difficulty to face evidence, meaning plugging your ears, putting your head down on the table, not wanting to talk about it, making up stories because you don't want to face the reality, or having trouble telling the truth, so lying and making up stories, They're listening and paying attention to I think they have Letitia Stauch pegged, but they haven't made up their minds yet.
Consequences of actions be indicative of mental disability or past trauma related BPD.
So we have Letitia Stauch pegged. She can't face the evidence. She can't take accountability. She makes up stories and lies. Is that indicative of the borderline personality disorder, of trauma, of mental illness? They're not just condemning her for it, which is what they're acting as a jury should. They're saying, we know she's doing all this stuff. We get it. We hear the evidence. But is that indicative of mental illness? They're trying to determine, is that at play here?
Really long question. Can I ask you to break it into chunks?
Sure. Can a difficulty or inability to face evidence or to be rigorously honest or to hold oneself accountable for consequences of actions be indicative of mental disability or past trauma-related borderline personality disorder?
Okay, I think I can answer that as a whole.
Would it help if you have the question in front of you? Okay.
I can.
Okay, so the difficulty or inability to face evidence or be rigorously honest or hold oneself accountable for consequences are not signs of a mental illness. That would not reach the level of a mental disability.
So the answer to that is no. So she's suffering with all this stuff and doing all this stuff and can't be accountable and listen to the evidence and tell the truth. That doesn't mean she has a mental disability.
Can it be indicative of past trauma or BPD? Possibly, but the manifestations of that.
Past trauma or BPD. So again, kind of an it depends.
The inability to face the evidence and be honest, those would not be considered symptoms of a mental illness that would reach the level of a mental disability.
Okay. And then I need it back so I can read the next question. Everybody knows what it is. Can compulsive lying indicate mental disability?
Compulsive lying is...
Again, they have her pegged. Compulsive liar. She is a compulsive liar. We are learning what the jury thinks. Is that usually associated with mental illness?
Usually associated with an antisocial personality. It would not be a symptom of a mental illness. So it would not reach the threshold of a mental disability.
What does it take for a theory put forth in a psychology peer-reviewed publication to become mainstream enough to be published as part of some version of the DSM?
Whew. Big questions. Like, what does it take for an article to be legitimized in your field, basically, is what they're asking.
It's a very good question.
And they're paying attention because the lawyers were fighting about this article, whether or not this article is going to come in, whether or not she reads this article, whether or not she sees this article as authoritative. There was a lot of discussion about that.
My honest answer is the DSM is very political. There are groups of people that want to put forth ideas, and there's committees, and there's voting, and there's agendas, and sometimes it can seem a bit capricious as to what gets accepted and what doesn't. But with enough people endorsing ideas and testing out those theories and seeing that they're accurate and gaining momentum, that helps it become more acceptable in the field and possibly into the
people testing it, peer reviewing it, legitimizing it, agreeing with it. But a lot of it is political. One person gets published and one person becomes the expert. Whatever they write gets in there. You could have a genius that nobody knows and maybe theirs won't get in there. So there's a little bit of that as well.
DSM.
Is it possible for a person with a great or normal upbringing to have anxiety disorder or to develop dissociative identity disorder?
So is it possible with somebody that had a great or non-abusive upbringing, not like Letitia Stauch, to still suffer from anxiety and DID? Another good question. And again, these are coming from different jurors. So maybe one juror thinks she's lying about her upbringing. She actually had a great upbringing, but even if I don't agree or don't believe her about the prior abuse, maybe somebody thinks she's lying about her upbringing and her prior abuse. Could she still have anxiety and DID? So again, these are coming from individual jurors. Now, If only one juror writes a question, everybody knows what question they had and what they're thinking. But if there's 3 or 4 questions, people might not know which juror asked which question.
Anybody can develop anxiety. That's not particular to any kind of upbringing. Certainly people with difficult upbringings tend to have worse outcomes, but people with good upbringings can have anxiety for a variety of reasons.
Anybody can have anxiety for a million different reasons. You don't need to be a mental health expert to know that.
I'm sorry, can you please, the DID piece?
Yes. Is it possible for a person with a great or normal upbringing to have anxiety disorder or to develop dissociative identity disorder?
Dissociative identity disorder is very highly correlated with trauma. So you don't just
So DID, on the other hand, different from anxiety, is highly correlated with trauma.
start to dissociate by having a normal upbringing and nothing bad happened to you. It's generally accepted that DID comes from some kind of bad event.
Right. I will allow reasonable follow-up as to those questions only. Prosecution,
No, thank you.
defense?
Prosecutors are like, nope, they're picking up what we're putting down. And she answered all of them perfectly for us. I thought that she was a great witness. That's why I wanted to hit on her today. I wanted to hit on her today. That was not the right verbiage. I wanted to discuss her today in our video because I thought she did a great job. Let's listen to just a couple of the defense's follow-up, and then we're done with the video.
Mr. Tellini?
Could we sincere believe that people are going to believe me, despite the fact that I have repeatedly lied to them about other stuff, be delusional?
I'm not going to allow that. I'm not sure. Tell me where that fits in on the questions that I've allowed.
The first question about whether pathological lying or refusal to face the evidence in front of you could be signed.
Okay. All right, go ahead.
I'm going to rephrase the question so I make sure I'm answering it correctly. Is it delusional to believe that despite the fact that I have lied repeatedly, now I think they're going to believe me?
Yeah, can that be delusional in some sense?
I think that practical approach to that would be, it might be irrational, but it doesn't necessarily cross the threshold into a delusional belief. Is it fixed? Or is there any ability to consider an alternate point of view? There's other questions I would need to ask before making a statement about that, but just because something's irrational doesn't mean it's delusional.
Okay. And then as far as the question regarding when does an article become mainstream and in the DSM-5, the DSM-5 actually states that people with borderline personality disorder can suffer psychotic-like symptoms, including hallucination, body image distortions, ideas of reference, and I'm going to say this wrong, hypogenic phenomena during times of stress. I can't say it. Can you pronounce this for me? Let me approach.
Hold on. Let's finish the question. And then I'm not going to allow that question, but you can go ahead and finish it.
I'm not going to allow that question, but you can go ahead and finish it. So we can kind of stop there, and you get that they wanted to follow up some to try again to use those questions to their advantage and answer some of the jurors' questions, right? That was the point, is you want to try to, if you think the juror has a bad question for you, they try to fix it. Thank you, New Chris. I also saw a ton of people, some new names and new people in here. And if you're new because of this case, let me know by putting Letitia Stauch in the comments. Or Gannon. Let's do Gannon. Justice for Gannon. Let's do something like that in the comments if you're new from this case. And a lot of people saying, man, I can't believe how nice everybody is in the chat, how awesome everybody is in the chat. Well, that's what makes this channel great. And that's what makes this conversation great, is the chat. That's what makes it interesting, is the chat and the questions. So I appreciate so much everybody that comes, that joins in, that asks questions, that answers questions as I'm talking. Because when I'm watching videos or reading a document or explaining something, I'm not following the chat always. Sometimes my eyes go there and I look and get distracted and answer questions. Speaking of great chat members, thank you, Azam. But yes, it's such a great chat, such a great community. So welcome to everyone. We love, diverse thought and disagreements and similarities and agreements, of course, as well. We're here for all of it. I appreciate everybody for joining me. This went a little bit too long. Thanks for sticking around. Hit that like button on the way out. I see some people trying to figure out which case they joined on. But until next time, tomorrow we're going to be talking Lori Vallow, and then Friday I'm taking off. We are going to post the podcast video though. So one more live this week. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter if you guys don't already. I'm trying to grow on there. But I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok at Tragos Law is our handle. And don't forget to listen to the Lawyer You Know podcast featuring new episodes every week. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, the Lawyer You Know.